You are listening to the What Women Want Today podcast. If you love the idea of being part of a community of women who are looking to thrive, not just survive, you're in the right place. Join hosts Terry Cullums and Amanda Keeper each week as they bring you topics and guests to help you improve your relationships, your health, and your emotional and spiritual well-being.
Hello, welcome to this week's episode of the What Women Want Today podcast. I'm your host, Terry Cullums.
There, I'm your co-host, Amanda Keeper.
I added a whole new syllable to my name just now. How's your day going? How is the weather in Rockford, Illinois?
It's not bad at all. Actually, this week is supposed to be 60 degrees and sunny for like the next 3 days. So, yeah, I was outside this morning and I'm like, oh, my walk is going to be so nice. Yesterday, my walk was beautiful. I went to Clem Arboretum. It's a garden. And the flowers were so beautiful, bright yellow and greens. And I was just loving the whole fall vibes of living in the Midwest. I'm not going to lie. And I'm so sorry I'm making you jealous right now, Terry, because I know you love fall in the Midwest. Yeah. But I was just like, I don't know. I felt so grateful to be living in the Midwest yesterday.
Oh, that's good. Not to one up you, but I went hiking this morning at that place I've been telling you about, that San Pedro house, and we saw two deer. Two deer passed in front of us on the path. So that was pretty cool. So yeah, we do get some color change down here in southern Arizona. So, but I did see a lot of it when I was in Kansas City a couple weekends ago. So yes, I do love the Midwest. I love the color change. It's amazing.
Yes. My sister-in-law was like, my husband just went and got some apples from the apple orchard, and her son just had some dental work and he can't eat. And I'm like, you should have gotten him the apple slushy, girl.
Oh, the apple slushy. That must be a new thing.
They have apple slushies now. It's all the fun stuff. So
yeah, whenever I'm out somewhere and they have pumpkin white chocolate frappuccino or something, I'm like, that sounds good in theory, but I will not want something that's sweet in my coffee.
Love it. Well, I'm excited for our podcast today because this is a topic that I know Terry and we both feel very strongly about. We talk about it a lot. And the topic that we're going to jump into today is about the stories we tell ourselves and how the stories we tell ourselves impacts our mental health or our mental well-being. So Terry and I are always thinking of new topics, and a lot of times we get topics from other podcasts, and we use that as inspiration for our own podcast. So today, what inspired us is a podcast from it's called The Hidden Brain. And it's one of my new favorites. And this podcast is all about stories of redemption or stories of contamination. And specifically, the interviewer is interviewing a researcher named Jonathan Adler. And he talks about his research specifically from a study called Living into the Story, Agency and Coherence, and narrative identity development and mental health in psychotherapy. And, Terry, we have looked at Brene Brown's work. We've looked at John Maxwell's work, and people use different words to talk about the same concept. But I really loved how they jumped into stories of contamination versus redemption and how we make meaning of what happens to us in our lives. And so the premise here is the theoretical premise is that things are going to happen to us. Bad things are going to happen to us. And the people that fare better in life are people that can tell the story in a way where they come out on top as victorious and turning their pain into purpose, or the universe was playing out for them, not against them. And they can integrate what happened to them into their identity in a way that is positive and that is going to serve them in the future. Yes. And so I know I asked you to take a listen to that podcast. What was it like for you, first of all, listening? And then did things pop up in your mind from your own life experiences where you're like, yeah, I've done that?
Absolutely. So first of all, audience and my friend Amanda, I love you so much, but I hate that podcast.
Love
I
it.
think it's so funny that you and I are like so on the same page about so many things in life. And then you sent me that podcast a few weeks ago when we were going to talk about savoring. And I was like,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
don't really like this podcast. Love the content.
Uh-huh.
I don't love the podcast. So when you sent me the second one, I was like, holy
You're like,
crap,
oh,
I gotta listen to this. So, but I will say in all fairness, like the first time I listened to it through, I thought, well, how is this different from reframing? Like that's what
yeah.
popped in my head. How is this different from reframing? Which is something I try to do a lot. Try to take a negative and reframe it and try to look at like how the positive, can come out of that. But the second time when I knew that we were going to actually talk about this and I wanted to be able to apply it to my own life and to how we might bring value to our audience with this topic, it is a very interesting it's a very interesting study. And then, like the universe always does, as soon as you have something that you're thinking about, you start to attract all these stories into your life, and like everyday conversations become, well, was that a redemptive story or was that a contamination story? So I've had
Totally.
the time, like over the past few days, to both think about my own life as either one of those, or different parts of my life as either one of those, and also just different things that people have said to me. So I have something I want to ask you about. So this morning, and this is me and my husband have the most morbid conversations sometimes, but one of the
Oh boy.
conversations, yeah, you're scared. One of the conversations we've had in the past, and one that I brought up to my friend Jen this morning when we were out on our very beautiful walk, was, would you rather have your mind go first or your body go first? Like, would you rather have all of your faculties know everything going around, that's going around on around you, and not have your body to like follow suit with your mind? Or would you rather have your mind to sort of go, but your body be okay? Have you ever thought about this before? I'm like throwing this at you.
But I think that the way that we experience, I feel like I know what your answer is going to be, and I think we're going to have different answers. But I think I would rather have my mind and have to have help, other people help me get my body around, because through our minds and through our awareness, we're able to perceive what stimuli is around us, and I would hate to like lose moments with my grandkids and my husband and my students, and I savor those moments, and just I would not want to lose that. Yeah.
I think you're going to be surprised then that that's exactly what I say. I say
Oh.
I need my mind. I need to be able to, because I do get so stimulated by learning new things and
Mhm.
talking to people. I was thinking about this weekend. We had Brian's cousin and her husband visiting us, and like it's very enjoyable for me. Like it's just as enjoyable for me to sit at home, have very stimulating conversation, just throw something on the grill, you know, bring out the wine or whatever, as it is to go out to eat somewhere. Because I feel like almost like staying home, you can get more intimate and you can have conversation that you might not have if you're out in a public place. So I need that kind of stimulation in order to feel good about the world, around me. Um, but Jen, she had the opposite. She's like, "Hey, if I don't know, I don't know." Like, if my mind's gone, like I have no idea my mind's gone. So it's all good. But
Yeah.
the interesting part about that conversation is you could almost frame either one of those as a redemption story or a contamination story. So I'm wondering for you, have you, over the last few days since we've been talking about this topic, have you come across any situations where you could see how it could end up being an either or do you think they always usually fall in one box or another?
I think life happens and there are objective facts, and it's the meaning that we make about those objective facts that influences the quality of our lives.
Yeah, yeah, it's a great
So
answer.
I would I'd probably say in most situations that it's a cumulative effect. But in most situations, I think that, yeah, we're always making meaning. And I think that's what's so beautiful about the human condition is I don't know that there's any other being out there, that's what separates humans from every other species is that we are meaning making creatures and we think about ourselves and we think about existential questions like meaning and purpose. And it's a source of suffering, but it also can be a source of great joy.
Yeah. I wrote down a couple of things when I was trying to dig in a little deeper to our content today. One of them is that stories are how we make sense of our lives.
Right.
So in that particular podcast that we both listened to, he talked about how it depends on where you end the chapter, right?
Correct.
Which I thought was like super fascinating. So I tried to think of a story in my own life where, if you just move the chapter a little bit, the ending of the chapter a little bit, how it makes it a different story. And so I came up with one example.
Oh, fun.
Yeah. So I'm getting my hair done the other day and I've only gone to my stylist, probably this particular stylist, probably, I don't know, 3 or 4 times. So we're still at that point where we're asking each other a lot of questions, making small talk and all that. And she's thinking about having another baby. And she said, how did you find out you were having twins? Like, were you totally shocked, or was this like something that ran in your family and you were kind of like wondering if it might happen to you? And I said, oh no, when I got pregnant with my twins, we didn't find out until much later that my grandma had twin brothers that were stillborn. They didn't talk about that kind of stuff back then, So I'm telling her the story. So I said, it's kind of an interesting story. I said, I was actually going to go into the military. I was going to go in and, oh gosh, no, I've lost the word, where you go in and you're not full time. You're just sort of
Reserve.
like reserves. Thank you. I was going to go into the reserves because I was not happy in my marriage. I had already had one child who was going to be turning 3. And I knew that I was not going to stay in my marriage. And I'm kind of a planner. So I thought, I can't just leave and not have a way to support my daughter. Like, I'm not going to leave and not have a good life for her. I'd already kind of been down that path when she was, long story. But anyway, I'll stick to the point. So I was going to have a plan. So I enrolled in the reserves, and the place that you leave from to go to boot camp is called a MEP center. And the MEP center where we lived was like 3 hours away. Now, my husband was already in the military. He was in the Navy. And so leading up to me going to boot camp, I was a mess. I was a hot mess. I was going to be leaving my almost 3-year-old daughter for 6 weeks to go off to boot camp. And I kept telling myself, it's for the greater good. It's for the greater good. Like, this has a purpose to it. And the very day that I was going to leave from the MEP center, they routinely run a pregnancy test on all women. And I was pregnant. And so I could not go into the military. And the funny part is, this was August 26th, on her 3rd birthday. In April, I had gone to my doctor because I was having a lot of problems with my cycle. He put me on the pill. And so somewhere between going to the doctor at the end of April and August 26th, I managed to get pregnant on the pill. So I know, crazy, right? And then so August 26th, I realized, okay, my plan is crap. I can't do this, right? So I'm just gonna have to figure out another way. So a couple of months pass and I go in for my ultrasound like all women do. And they asked my husband to leave the room. And they said, they moved the little scanner on one side of your belly and they're like, do you see this? And I was like, yeah. No, just for some context, I am like 19 years old at this point, about ready to have my 3rd child. So I'm still, I'm still a young girl. So do you see this on the right side of my belly? I'm like, yes. They roll it over to the other side and they say, do you see this? And I'm very confused at this point. And I say, yes. And I go, what is it? And they're like, well, this is baby A and this is baby B. And I was like, what? Oh, you're having twins. So not only was I not going to be able to leave and go into the military, I was about to become a mother of 3 children. And so if I ended the chapter right there, don't you think that's a contamination story? Because that's a story that turned out positive, that turned into a negative, right? Because now like the character in the story could be hopeless. She could feel like
Right.
she had no hope for her future, right? But
Yeah.
if you move
Just the marriage, you just said you were getting ready to get a divorce. So
right,
I'm feeling
right.
pretty hopeful now. I'm like, oh my gosh, now I'm trapped.
Yeah,
I'm
trapped, no solution to this problem, no way to
right.
support myself. Now I have 3 kids. How am I ever going to get out of this? So
Yeah.
if you end the chapter there, that's a
Mm,
contamination story. If you
correct.
fast forward the story, I don't know, I don't even know how many years, I'll say 11, let's say 11 years total. Now I'm the owner of an insurance agency. I can support myself. I have a great job. I have book club friends. Like I have this amazing life and, I'm in a whole different situation. So I really liked that part of the podcast where he talked about like, just move the ending of the chapter a little bit and you might
Right.
turn a contamination story into a redemption story.
Yeah, absolutely. It's called punctuation. It's like, where do you
Yeah.
punctuate the story?
Right.
Right. And so, I so many stories and so many examples are playing out in my mind right now. I can tell you that oftentimes when I'm working with clients in my office for counseling,
Mhm.
a lot of people come into counseling because they are stuck in a contamination story.
Oh yeah, I can
So,
imagine.
yes. So, for example, one person that I worked with in the past had these really great dreams of becoming a lawyer. And, he went through all of the prep work to become a lawyer. He went through all kinds of schooling, sleepless nights, didn't get to go out and party like the rest of his buddies did. He was so immersed and obsessed with his identity of being like an overachiever, and he was super proud. Everybody had, coined him as like the golden child in his school. He was valedictorian of his class, and then he didn't pass the bar exam.
Oh,
Imagine, right?
right.
Like imagine how disorienting that is when your whole identity and years of sacrifice, and you get to this point in your story that what you thought was going to come true doesn't come true,
Right.
right? And so we worked for a long time actually in therapy on identity integration, and having to get to a point where he realized that I have to let the identity of becoming a lawyer die before I can let anything else new come in. And that is a whole grief process. I mean,
Absolutely.
you talk about the stages of grief, like denial, like there's no way that this is
Anger.
possible,
Yeah.
anger, all different kinds of depression that were in there for months and months. Then we get to a point in the therapeutic process where we start talking about different avenues and what he could do after that. And he started talking about how when he was in law school, like there was a certain case that he had, or not law school, when he was in undergrad, he had worked on a case where he was trying to help a nonprofit organization because he had had a physical illness when he was younger. And he ended up going back and connecting with the organization that worked in the nonprofit to help him for his physical illness. And he ended up being like a project manager and helping people who were facing like really scary diagnoses, helping them and their families get through that horrible, horrible time, and like becoming an advocate of resources and all sorts of grants and programs that people don't understand to help save lives and save families' mental wellness. And there's absolutely like nothing he could ever imagine himself doing now. Like he's in his bliss, he's in his joy. And had that door not closed for him, he would have never had the opportunity to walk through another door
Yeah.
because he wouldn't have been looking for it.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I'm thinking about Another thing that they said in the podcast, I don't know if I've like truly had time to process enough to wrap my brain fully around it, but I started to process it a little bit. And that is the factor of how cultural narratives play into the stories we tell.
Mm-hmm.
And the only one that I could like really, kind of like try to place myself in the story was, so the cultural narrative in America is probably one of, you grow up as a woman, you grow up, you either seek further education or you don't. You get married by a certain age, you have children by a certain age. So that's a cultural narrative, right? So if you're a woman,
it's also a generation. It's also a generational narrative because it's changed now.
True, very true.
Yeah.
But if you end up in a situation where you can't have babies,
Yes.
so then like you could almost tell yourself that you failed because culturally that's what's sort of the normal thing to do. And so you can get, kind of caught up in that cultural narrative, and your story can become of one of, I'm not valuable. I did something wrong.
Yeah.
There's something wrong with me because I can't do this thing that I'm supposed to, quote unquote, supposed to do. Can you think of any other examples of like cultural narratives that come into factor in the stories that we tell ourselves?
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to career because I have other clients that are from other cultures. And in a lot of other cultures, specifically, I'm thinking of like Indian culture or Sri
Yes.
Lankan culture. Like, you're either a doctor or you're a lawyer.
Yes, that's what Jay Shetty talks about.
Yeah. That,
Yeah.
like, you're a doctor or a lawyer. And so if you don't become one of those things, like, you have a contamination story that not only are you putting on yourself, but your whole
Your
entire
family.
family is projecting onto you as well.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
now you have to negotiate and integrate the fact that you're going to be a disappointment to your elders, and your whole vision that you had for yourself is going to be thrown off course, and now you're totally disoriented and searching for an identity, and feel as like a failure at the same time.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the other things that I wrote down was people who believe their lives are meaningful tend to tell stories defined by growth, communion, and agency.
Yes, I love the word agency.
I do too.
Agency means, I wrote this, I worked on this with a client, and I wrote this down. The universe isn't happening to you. The universe is happening for you. And
Absolutely.
people that feel like they have agency, they are more likely to go downstream and to let life unfold, and then sort of see where they can pivot and twist and turn to make the next right choice for them, and not go upstream, which is decide that somebody else is the sort of author of their story,
Right.
and they're just like a character in the play,
Right.
and they have no influence over the outcome of the story.
Absolutely. Yep. Love that.
Yeah. So like, I keep thinking about career counseling. Like, a lot of times people will come in and there's new leadership, and I'm sure you can totally relate to this, Terry, that
Mm-hmm.
there's new leadership in a company, and people have enjoyed these like glory years where they had this brilliant leadership, and the culture was so like fulfilling, and it was healthy, and people had psychological safety, and people were appreciated and acknowledged. And then you have new leadership come in, and all of those things that you enjoyed as part of your reality are now changed.
Yeah.
And in many ways, it is very real. Your day-to-day life and environment has been contaminated.
I've actually
People are not
experienced it the other way as well, where,
where
life was very stressful. Like when I very first became an operations manager for the same insurance company that I owned my agency through, when I very first became an operations manager, the woman that was in charge, I kind of give her credit for a lot of my stomach issues and the beginning of my sleep issues, because you felt like you walked on eggshells around her all the time. Like you never knew when she was going to go off about something, and your life was not your own. Like I would travel to Madison, Wisconsin from Arizona at least once a month. And oftentimes, because it was so close to where I grew up, where, and where you live and my daughters and other friends and family, I would make plans to see people, while I was there. It was kind of a perk of the job. I mean, I had to travel a lot, but I also had some perks. And I would never know if she would say, we're working till 10 o'clock tonight, be at the office from 7 or 8 o'clock in the morning till 10 o'clock at night, because she would not allow for any kind of work-life balance or agency to make your own work schedule. And yeah, so I've had the opposite to be true as well. And then a new leader come in and it was like a fairy tale suddenly, because you had this leader who really understood how to motivate people and how to make a different type of culture in the workplace.
So it's interesting that you use that example, because those are very objective facts. And I don't want people to think that we are just like, oh, well, stay in that environment where you end up with ulcers and your boss wants you to work 10 hours a day and just think positive. This isn't about this is not think positive and be Pollyanna, right?
Exactly.
This is, okay, something's happened in the story that's punctuated the story. Your agency is, are you telling yourself, I can't leave this job, I'm never going to make this amount of money, I have to have this amount of money, I'll totally lose my identity, I'll never be happy? Like, are you pigeonholing yourself into I have to stay in this particular job? Or is this a story of redemption? I took my authorship back and I was like, I have a choice whether or not I'm going to work here. And I decided I'm not going to work here. That's just one example. And I end up for this other company and I end up, more fulfilled than I ever thought I was. But agency is when you know your own value and you make meaning and purpose, because okay, the objective fact is this woman is not a kind boss and not as emotionally intelligent boss. And those are the objective facts. Now, what I do with that information and how I make meaning and what my next move is speaks to if I feel like I have agency in my own life.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, that's easier said than done. It's not easy just to pick up and leave. But
right. Well, especially if you have what they call the golden handcuffs. Like my husband is 3.5 years away from retirement. If he suddenly got new leadership in at his company, the chances of him leaving or us moving again are small. Right. They're much smaller. So I'm glad you brought that point up. And also, it's interesting that when we do tell a story, it's not all fact. There are objective things in the story, right? And we can choose as we look back on our life. So, not as recent past, but look back a little farther in our life, we pick and choose what parts of the story we want to emphasize so that we can either create the contamination story or the redemption story. Right?
Correct. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think of you in a lot of these different situations. You have really faced a lot of hardship over the last, I don't know, I want to say 8 or 9 years, right? You've basically had to recreate, redefine your home, what you even call home, many times. And it's not easy.
No.
You went from this magnificent house that you built together and got married at to moving out into a piece of property or a piece of land that you put up a makeshift barn that became, something that didn't have windows that you had to make do, right? I remember as you were going through that moving process, you were selling a bunch of your clothes. You were getting rid of the vast majority of your material belongings.
I did. I think I got rid of 75% because a lot of my clothes were, business professional clothes, and I didn't see a need for them where we were going. So, yeah. And a lot of decorative things, because my mindset was, who knows if they're going to work in the next place I live. So I'm not going to drag these things all over the place with me. So, yeah.
I know that things are really special to you. You carefully choose your things. You are an aesthetically very aware person. So I know that there's attachment to those things as well. And that's the thing about contamination and redemption stories is there are real attachments that come with those choices of making meaning.
Yeah. And so that's great, because that makes me think of this. So this is a little bit of a reframe, but it's also a story that we tell ourselves too, is like, so if you were to put me and Brian in this story and ask us to tell it, his story would be, well, we can always get more things. We'll always make more money. We can always just get new things. Where my story comes from a lot of things that have happened in the past, and that feeling of lack. Like, well, what if we don't have enough to get new things? What if this is the last time I have this beautiful, whatever vase or whatever it was? So even putting people in the same story, but asking them to tell it can be very, redemptive versus contamination as well, right?
I absolutely love that you just said that, because when you counsel someone and you ask them to tell their story, usually their story is actually not even the current story. It's the childhood story.
Oh, I just heard that from somebody else recently too. Like your marriage can be a lot about like just things from your childhood, just placed into the, the current story, right?
Yeah. So go back to your story. So
my story was
where you grew up.
Yeah, grew up with lack and not knowing if you were going to have things, and kind of hoarding things because you didn't know if you were ever going to get them again. Like I wasn't the kid who got their Halloween candy or their Easter basket and ate it all really fast. I was like, no, I got to save this because I don't know when I'm going to get this again. So, as much as I feel like I've grown, and I have, some of that still sticks with me, and so, what you said is I'm very choosy about what I select for my home. Part of it is the aesthetic, and part of it is, am I willing to spend the money on that, So yeah, there's always a little bit more to the story.
Yeah. And in those feelings that come up in the situations in our adult life, the feeling of like when that boss came in and she like was, you're here 10 hours and that's it. And I don't care if you've eaten today or what you had planned for the weekend or any other plans. Like it's my priority and you're going to fall in line. Did that feel like anything from your childhood? If I know you probably didn't think about it, but did it feel like any other relationship from your childhood that you can connect it to?
I mean, you're right. I probably didn't put two and two together at the time, but yes, I've always just kind of like didn't speak up for myself and didn't ask for that boundary, and so I didn't feel like it was even possible to ask for what I needed. And that's a repetitive theme, from my childhood. Not to just to silence yourself and stay out of trouble. So just don't ask for what you need or what you want.
Right. So it's so much, we could dig so deep into it. I really loved all the research that they cited. If the listeners are interested in listening to this podcast or checking out the transcript, what I really love is that they also look at how people who have really bad problems with alcohol, how they tell the story of taking their last drink.
Oh, yeah.
Some of the research that they cited, they actually looked at people that were alcoholics and how they told the story of their last drink as either contamination or redemption. They also looked at chronically stressed adults who had children with special needs and how they told the story of basically losing their life to take care of their special needs child, or is it something that empowered them? One person that they cited, it was really interesting. One person that they cited, it said, for one person, her special needs child taught her a lot about who she was as a person, how she was open, how she was not open to people and things, and how she felt like having this challenging parenting experience really helped reshape who she was as a person, what it meant for her to not only be a parent, but also a human in relation to other human beings that she loved dearly. And what happened was through that, her empathy for other people and her what used to be a awareness of and a focus on self really started becoming a focus on others as just a way of being in the world. And she was very proud of that.
Yeah.
So I guess what's the message for the listeners today? What would we say as a result of this? Be aware of the stories that you're telling yourself.
And where you're putting the punctuation.
Where you're putting the punctuation, and be aware that where you punctuate your story impacts your mental health and well-being.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We started talking about doing something together years ago, and we said there is power in your story. And that was in like
Yes.
2018. And, you know, we're
Yeah.
at the end of 2023, and it's just as relevant today as it was in 2018 when we first started talking about it. You know, our story could have ended, you know, the full book could have ended. You know, we grew up in a trailer park. We grew up in abusive homes. We grew up with some level of neglect. But the power of our story is that that wasn't the end of our story. Our story
That was,
continues and continues. And I love to say this, like, you're the author.
yeah.
You get to write the next line, you get to write the next chapter, and you get to write the ending of your book. Don't let somebody else hold the pen.
Absolutely. I love that quote. Don't let somebody else hold the pen of your story.
That's right.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm going to encourage listeners, even though I said I don't like the podcast, I'm going to encourage them to go listen to the episode. I'll make sure to include it in today's show notes. I think this is a really important topic, probably to reflect on a little bit is, you know, where have you ended the chapters in your story? And if you just moved the chapter ending just a little bit differently in a different spot, you know, can you reframe that story and turn it into a redemption story versus a contamination story? That's my challenge for the listeners today.
Absolutely. And please go to our Facebook page and other ways of connecting on Instagram. And if you have a story of redemption that you'd like to share with us, we'd love to hear it. Have a great
Definitely.
day.
Have a great day. Amanda, I don't know if this ever happens to you, but I sometimes will learn something really cool on a podcast, on a YouTube video, audiobook, whatever. I think I'm going to remember it and then I forget. Does that ever happen to you?
Yeah, I call it brain after 40 all the time.
Well, that's what we'll officially call it. But we've come up with something. Do you want to introduce it?
Sure. It's from an app called Jim Quick, and it's an acronym called FAST.
Yeah, and the F, it stands for Facebook. So we're inviting you officially right now to come over and join us on Facebook. Get involved with the community. Share your favorite episodes with your friends on Facebook.
Yeah, the A is go ahead and take an action. So you can't remember anything if you don't act.
And S is for subscribe. Make sure you're subscribed to our YouTube channel.
And then T is teach. Teach what you've learned to somebody else. Share the love.
All right, we hope that works for you. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you next week.
Bye-bye.